April 12, 1944. 27,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. The air smelled of cold oil and ozone. The sky was a flat, brutal blue that made the thin air feel like glass against the skin. In the cockpit of a polished silver fighter, Captain Robert "Bob" Jenkins, 56 Fighter Group, thumbed the throttle of his P-51 and felt the airplane answer like a horse that had finally been taught to leap. The Rolls-Royce Merlin behind him, its satin cowling bared, its lineage British, hummed with a fierce, steady life. Not the wheeze of the earlier Allison power plants but a deep, urgent song that promised speed and altitude and the kind of endurance that turns luck into strategy. Below him the German industrial plains stretched in neat soot-dark rectangles, dotted with ant-like convoys and the crooked spires of factories. In the distance, a formation of B-17s drifted through the air like slow, white islands, their bellies bristling and vulnerable. Jenkins' squadron circled, eyes on the horizon, on the thin black dots on the distant cloud deck that might become Messerschmitts. Radios crackled, curt, clipped voices, ranks and call signs, the metallic breath of command. Lead, this is Zulu. Visual on the bombers. Keep tight. Bandits maybe 10 o'clock high. The world in his helmet narrowed to the altimeter, the compass, the spade of the throttle lever under calloused fingers. This morning's P-51s were not the same fighters that had, just a few months earlier, lumbered after bombers helplessly at 20,000 feet. These Mustangs climbed as if dragged by ropes of air, the Merlins pulling them up, coaxing them into thinner sky where German fighters stalled and coughed. When the first pair of Bf-109s came screaming in from the sun, black silhouettes with the casual violence of hawks, the Mustangs met them at a height and energy they had no right to have months before. Jenkins rolled, gravity tightened, and the Merlin's supercharger sang. He felt the aircraft do something old Mustangs could not. It accelerated while diving without bleeding off the energy the pilot needed to fight his way out of danger. Far from the front, in a low, sunlit hangar in Inglewood, California, a man scribbled calculations and scowled at model drawings. Edgar Schmued, chief engineer at North American Aviation, a wiry man with an appetite for audacity and an architect's patience, tapped his pencil against a blueprint until the room hummed with possibility. He had been watching the P-51 since the X-planes, since the NA-73 prototype had first slid off the line. He liked the airframe, the laminar flow wing, the fuselage lines that whispered speed. But he hated its engine. The Allison V-1710 could be coaxed and tuned, but above 20,000 feet it went soft. The airplane's life was choked off just when bomber escorts needed their wings the most. Schmued's obsession wasn't born from abstract theory. It came from late nights in the wind tunnel, from a steady diet of pilot reports that read like complaint letters, and from a time-tested engineer's gut. The P-51 was elegant, but it needed a heart that could deliver performance where the war demanded it, at altitude for hours on end with speed to spare. The Rolls-Royce Merlin was not American. It was British, born of the spit and genius of wartime necessity. It had a two-speed, two-stage supercharger, a mechanical mind for thin air. To pair that engine with the Mustang's sleek bones was, in the eyes of many in his company, an ill-considered marriage at best and outright heresy at worst. "You want to put a foreign engine in our fighter?" the contracts manager had asked months earlier, voice flat with the terror of procurement red tape. Schmued had only smiled and unfolded his calculations. Drag coefficients, center of gravity permutations, intercooler placements. He spoke not like a salesman but like a man translating a new dialect. "Not foreign," he said. "Right engine, right airplane. It will be a different P-51. He argued down corridors and over coffee, cornered test pilots in briefing rooms, and most importantly convinced one man in Washington to allow the experiment, a small batch of P-51s fitted with Packard-built Merlins under license. Back in the sky above Bremen, those decisions manifested in syllables and roars. A Mustang that had once been mediocre at altitude, now behaved like an idea fully realized. Jenkins rolled into a head-on pass and watched his nose slice through air that had, minutes earlier, felt like a wall. He thought, fleetingly, of the hangar men's hands in Inglewood and the dry desks in Washington where contracts lay like sentries. He thought of Schmued only as a name someone had mentioned in a debriefing room, Edgar Schmued, stubborn bastard. One pilot had laughed, but the thought hardened into gratitude because the plane answered every twitch, every demand. In the radio the bomber lead's voice cut through with a simple order: "Cover, gentlemen. Keep them off our tails." The Mustangs surged. At 27,000 feet the fight became geometry and timing. Speed was leverage, altitude was currency, and the Merlin gave both. When Jenkins sighted the Messerschmitt closing for a deflection shot, he didn't have to dive to meet it and lose position. He could stay close, trade speed for angle and force the German into a mistake. It was an unfamiliar confidence for a man whose previous escorts had often ended in frustration and retreat. Below the surface of the dogfight, in the grease and sweat of production lines and the stubbornness of one engineer, a transformation was taking place that would change the air war over Europe. But up here, in the roaring intimacy of pilot and machine, the change was mercifully simple. The fighter did what it was told. The Mustang finally had a voice. Edgar Schmued was not a man who liked to be told no. Born in Germany in 1899, raised under the shadow of the Great War, and tempered by the hard lessons of engineering for survival, Schmued had the kind of precise stubbornness that wartime innovation demands. By the 1930s he was in America, North American Aviation's quiet, angular genius, an immigrant with a heavy accent and a mind full of airflow equations. He had an instinctive eye for shapes that wanted to fly, and a belief that design was a language that could speak performance. When North American Aviation received the request from the British Purchasing Commission in 1940 to build fighters under license, specifically the Curtiss P-40, Schmued did something radical. He told his superiors and the British delegation that they could design a better fighter from scratch in less time than it would take to copy the P-40. It was audacious. It was borderline reckless. But Schmued's confidence was rooted in an understanding of aerodynamics few engineers had at that moment. He had been studying the latest wind tunnel results from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA. Those reports included something revolutionary, the concept of a laminar flow wing, one that could dramatically reduce drag by keeping airflow smooth across its surface. The result was the NA-73X prototype, the first Mustang. Its shape was elegant, its skin smooth as a knife's edge. Test pilots marveled at how it handled near the ground and at medium altitudes. It was faster than most Allied fighters below 15,000 feet, and it had extraordinary range. The British loved it. But there was a problem. The Allison V1710 engine that powered it simply ran out of breath above 15,000 feet. In the European theater, where bomber escorts had to climb above 25,000 feet to meet Luftwaffe fighters, that shortcoming was fatal. The Mustang was fast and agile at low altitude, but in the war that mattered, it was a sports car in a mountain race. Schmued knew it. Pilots knew it. Engineers, accountants, and generals all knew it. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was how stubborn one man could be when he saw perfection within reach. At North American's Inglewood plant, Schmued spent long evenings alone in the drafting room, staring at the blueprints of the P-51's frame. He didn't see aluminum and rivets, he saw lines of force and pressure. Every curve, every angle, every vent in the cowling was a conversation with physics. The Allison engine was choking his design, and it ate at him like a splinter. Then came the idea that would change history. The Rolls-Royce Merlin. The same engine that gave the British Spitfire and Hurricane their edge in the Battle of Britain. It wasn't just powerful, it was sophisticated, equipped with a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that allowed it to gulp thin air at high altitude without losing power. If that engine could fit in his Mustang, Schmued believed it would unlock the design's true potential. But there was one problem: it wasn't American. In 1942, the U.S. military and industry were fiercely nationalistic. Buy American wasn't just a slogan, it was policy. Adopting a British power plant, even a proven one, meant crossing a bureaucratic minefield. Engineers whispered that Schmued's proposal was career suicide. He didn't care. He gathered his notes, his airflow charts, and his wind tunnel data. He marched into the office of Dutch Kindleberger, North American's president, and laid them out in silence. When Kindleberger raised an eyebrow, Schmued simply said, "We are wasting a perfect airplane." Kindleberger leaned back. "And what do you suggest?" "Give it the Merlin," Schmued said. "It will become the best fighter in the world." Kindleberger wasn't convinced, but he was a pragmatist. The British were already testing the idea themselves, fitting Merlin engines into existing Mustangs at Rolls-Royce's plant in Hucknall. When those test flights started showing astonishing climb rates and speed improvements, Kindleberger realized Schmued was right. The Mustang's rebirth had begun. Still, there were 1,000 obstacles between the dream and the sky. Mounting the Merlin required redesigning the engine mounts, coolant system, and cowling. The center of gravity had to be recalculated. Cooling ducts needed to be reshaped to maintain that signature laminar flow. Even the air scoop beneath the fuselage, the one that would later become the Mustang's iconic feature, was re-engineered to work with the Merlin's new intercooler. The work consumed Schmued. He often slept at the plant, curling up behind his drafting table. He would wake at dawn, brush off his shirt, and return to the drawings. Workers called him the ghost of Inglewood. But when the prototype P-51B Merlin powered, finally rolled out of the hangar, the factory fell silent. It looked the same, but it wasn't. Schmued watched as the test pilot climbed in, taxied out, and roared down the runway. The engine's note was different, deeper, sharper, confident. When it lifted off, Schmued didn't smile. He just exhaled, as if the aircraft had been waiting for this all along. The test reports would later read like small miracles. Top speed, 440 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 41,900 feet. Range, over 1,600 miles with drop tanks. Suddenly, the Mustang could fly farther, faster, and higher than anything the Allies had. The problem child had become a prodigy. And soon the war would give it a stage to prove it. By the winter of 1943, the first Merlin-powered Mustangs, the P-51B and C variants, began arriving in England. Painted in dull olive drab with invasion stripes hastily brushed along their wings, they were the quiet answer to a desperate problem. The daylight bombing campaign over Europe was failing. The 8th Air Force had been bleeding. B-17s and B-24s, flying deep into Germany, were being shredded by Luftwaffe interceptors long before they reached their targets. Entire bomber groups disappeared from the skies, 24 aircraft at a time, their crews swallowed by the cold clouds and the smoke of their own engines. Without long-range escorts, the American strategy of precision daylight bombing was little more than a death sentence. The fighters they had, the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning, were brave machines but limited. The Thunderbolt was tough, but guzzled fuel like a locomotive. The Lightning was swift and innovative but complex, and its engines often froze at altitude in the European winter. The Mustangs until now had been relegated to reconnaissance and low-altitude support, fast, sleek, but half-useless above 20,000 feet. Then came the Merlin. The new Mustangs, sleek and silver, arrived at Debden, Bottisham and Leiston airfields under grey English skies. Ground crews paused to admire them. Pilots ran their hands over the wings as if touching a thoroughbred horse. When they started the engines, the air vibrated with a new kind of music, a deep, steady, civilized roar. The Mustang didn't growl like a brute. It purred like it knew what it could do. Among the first to fly the new P-51B was Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley, commander of the 4th Fighter Group. A man who measured everything in results, Blakesley was unimpressed by promises and prototypes. He took the new aircraft aloft himself and put it through its paces. When he landed, he climbed out, tossed his gloves on the wing and said simply, "This is it. This is the airplane we've been waiting for." That endorsement was enough. The Mustang entered combat within weeks. On December 1, 1943, a squadron of P-51Bs flew their first escort mission over France, covering B-17s bound for industrial targets around Paris. The formation met enemy contact at 25,000 feet. The German pilots expected to find sluggish American fighters gasping for air. Instead, they found Mustangs diving out of the sun, faster, higher, and turning inside them with impossible grace. One German pilot, captured weeks later, reportedly told his interrogator, "We thought it was a new kind of Spitfire. But it kept going. We couldn't shake it." The impact was immediate. For the first time, American bombers reached their targets deep inside occupied Europe and came back. Word spread like wildfire through the bases of East Anglia. Pilots traded rumors. Mustangs seen over Bremen, Mustangs chasing FW-190s over Berlin, Mustangs that had followed retreating Messerschmitts nearly to the edge of Poland before turning for home. It was as though a new rule had been written into the sky. At North American Aviation, Schmued received the reports with quiet satisfaction. The engineers back in Inglewood pinned combat photos to the walls of the drafting room, grainy images of Mustangs glinting in the high sunlight over contrails of B-17 formations. The machine that had once been dismissed as an experiment was now rewriting the air war. But the transformation wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. Bomber crews who once counted every minute to the target now had escorts that could stay with them all the way. The long, cold hours over Germany were no longer a solitary gauntlet. When Mustangs appeared at their side, pilots and gunners would cheer into their oxygen masks. Some crews painted small Mustang silhouettes on their fuselages, calling them guardian angels. Still, the war was far from won. The Luftwaffe, desperate and proud, fought harder than ever. The German fighter A system meant that men like Adolf Galland and Walter Nautny still stalked the high clouds with lethal precision. But the odds were shifting. Every Merlin-powered Mustang in the sky was a blade in the slow dismemberment of Germany's air defense. Meanwhile, back in England, the pilots were learning the plane's character. The P-51 wasn't a brute like the Thunderbolt or a diva like the Spitfire. It was balanced, deliberate, an aircraft that rewarded finesse. Its control harmonics were so precise that a good pilot could fly it with 2 fingers. Yet, mishandle the throttle or overbank it in a dive and it could bite hard. Captain Gentleman Jim Goodson, one of the 4th Fighter Group's aces, once said, "The Mustang was like a woman you had to dance with, smooth, responsive, but you had to respect her moods." By early 1944, the Merlin Mustang had proven it wasn't just another fighter. It was an idea that worked, the marriage of British engineering and American design, of vision and persistence. And in the cold skies above Europe, it began to take on another role, not just protector of bombers but hunter of hunters. Because now, for the first time, the Allies had a fighter that could follow the enemy all the way home. March 4, 1944. Morning over northern Germany. The contrails stretch in parallel scars across a sky so bright it hurts to look at. Below them, 1,000 bombers lumber east toward Berlin, the heart of the Reich, the city once thought beyond the reach of daylight bombing. And above them, weaving like silver guardians, are the Mustangs. For the first time in the war, American fighter escorts will fly with the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Captain Robert "Bob" Jenkins, the same pilot who once struggled to keep up at altitude in his old Allison-powered P-51A, now flies a Merlin Mustang that feels alive under his hands. His squadron, part of the 354th Fighter Group, slices through the thin air at 27,000 feet. The radio is alive with clipped chatter. Call signs, altitudes, fuel checks. The bombers drone steadily below, tiny, glittering in the sunlight. At exactly 10:15 a.m., the call comes through the radio net, "Bandits, 10 o'clock high. The Luftwaffe has come." Bf-109s and Fw-190s, the elite of the German Jagdgeschwader, rising fast from bases near Hanover. Black dots against the bright white haze, closing the distance with terrifying speed. For years, these men had slaughtered American bombers with impunity, striking before the escorts could reach them. But today, as the German formation fans out to attack, the sky changes shape. The Mustangs turn toward them, already diving from altitude, sun glinting off polished wings. Jenkins pushes the throttle forward, the Merlin roars. In seconds he's past 400 miles per hour, the aircraft trembling just slightly in the thin air. He lines up a 190 in his sights, waits until the wings fill his gun sight ring and squeezes the trigger. 6.50 caliber Brownings hammer the silence with staccato fury. Tracer rounds leap forward, and a heartbeat later the German fighter bursts into a white fireball. The radio erupts, splash one. Splash one. The fight becomes chaos. Contrails twist into corkscrews, black smoke drifts through white clouds. Over the next 15 minutes, the Luftwaffe's attacking formation disintegrates under the onslaught. For every bomber they aim at, 2 Mustangs fall upon them, diving from above, firing in clean bursts, climbing back into the fight. The Germans are shocked. "Die Amerikaner fliegen so hoch," one pilot shouts into his radio. The Americans are flying so high. The Mustang service ceiling of over 40,000 feet has caught them off guard. By the end of the mission, the U.S. loses 21 bombers, a painful toll but far less than before. The Mustangs, in their first full Berlin mission, claim 68 German fighters destroyed. When the surviving crews land back in England that evening, the ground crews are waiting on the tarmac. Jenkins pulls his oxygen mask off, sweat freezing to his skin, and climbs down from the cockpit. His crew chief grins. "You made it to Berlin, sir?" Jenkins nods. "And back," he says simply. The headlines the next morning read, "American bombers raid Berlin in daylight, escorted by new fighters." For the Luftwaffe, it's a turning point. For years they had fought close to home, conserving fuel and pilots, relying on the Allies' short reach to limit the damage. Now the war has turned into a running battle over their own airfields. They have no sanctuary left. And for the Allies, the success of the Berlin mission changes everything. The P-51 isn't just another fighter, it's a strategic weapon. It means the bomber offensive, long teetering on the edge of collapse, can now strike anywhere in the Reich with acceptable losses. Back in California, Edgar Schmued reads the reports from the 8th Air Force. The numbers are clinical, but between the lines he sees the transformation he always believed possible. Escort success rate, 94%. Mustang endurance, 7.2 hours. Altitude performance, exceptional. He smiles, for once allowing himself to. "She flies as she was born to," he murmurs. For the men in the air, though, there is no time for pride. The missions come faster now: Berlin, Leipzig, Schweinfurt, Regensburg. Every week, deeper into the Reich. Every week, more proof that the Mustang is more than metal. It's momentum, a machine that turns human will into air superiority. But every success exacts a price. The Luftwaffe may be reeling, but its aces, men with hundreds of kills, are still deadly. And with every mile eastward, the strain on pilots, engines and souls grows heavier. Above the clouds, as spring 1944 bleeds into summer, the sky over Europe becomes a relentless duel between two kinds of men, those who built perfection and those who would destroy it. Summer, 1944. The air war over Europe has entered its most brutal and decisive phase. The once invincible Luftwaffe is fighting for its life, and above the clouds, the Mustangs are closing in for the kill. By now, the skies above France and Germany are a constant battleground. Each day, hundreds of P-51s fan out across the continent, not merely escorting bombers but hunting the enemy wherever he dares to rise. What began as a defensive measure has become an offensive weapon. The Mustang's range allows it to sweep ahead of bomber formations, dive on German airfields and destroy fighters before they can even take off. At dawn, the crews of the 352nd Fighter Group at Bodney Airfield in Norfolk gather around briefing tables under flickering lamps. The room smells of coffee and damp leather. On the map, red yarn strings stretch deep into enemy territory: Magdeburg, Brunswick, Munich. The mission is simple but deadly: rover patrols. Seek and destroy. "Gentlemen," says their commanding officer, Colonel George Preddy, pointer tapping the map, "the bombers will be coming through here at 1100 hours. We'll go ahead, sweep the airfields around Ostersleben and clear the path. Keep your tanks full and remember, you can make it home. Don't dogfight below 5,000 feet unless you have to." Preddy's voice is calm, but his eyes are hard. He knows what's coming. Hours later, his blue-nosed Mustangs roar off the runway, climbing into the cold upper air. The formation tightens as they cross the channel, the rhythmic pulse of the Merlins blending into a single rolling thunder. The morning sun flashes across the silver fuselages, cripes a mighty passion wagon, Lu 4, each one hand-painted with nose art that blends humor and fear. Over the radio, quiet chatter breaks the silence. "Tally-ho, 11 o'clock low, looks like they're forming up." Preddy banks left. Below, a swarm of black crosses rises from a field near Magdeburg. Bf-109s climbing hard, their silver-propped discs flashing like coins. The Mustangs dive as one, sunlight exploding off their wings. The fight is merciless and fast. A German pair tries to climb into the sun for an advantage, but the Mustangs are faster, the Merlin engine singing at full throttle. Preddy rolls inverted, dives and opens fire. The tracers connect and a 109 blossoms into orange flame. He pulls up, skimming the smoke, scanning for another target. His wingman, Lieutenant Evans, calls out, "Watch your 6, George." A second later, Preddy yanks the stick, pulling 5GS, the canopy fogging as he rolls away from cannon fire. The Mustang shrieks through the air, the sound of the supercharger rising in pitch like a scream. In less than 10 minutes, the German formation is shattered. 12 aircraft down. Not a single Mustang lost. This pattern repeats across Europe day after day. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of the skies, is being systematically dismantled. For every German ace that rises, there are 5 new Mustang pilots waiting to meet him. The effect is catastrophic for German morale. Their fighter production continues, but their fuel supply, crippled by Allied bombing, dries up. Their pilots, many now hastily trained teenagers, climb into cockpits knowing they may not survive their first mission. Meanwhile, the Mustangs become symbols of confidence and inevitability. They lead the way on D-Day, sweeping the beaches of Normandy clear of enemy aircraft. They escort the great armadas of bombers that flatten the German industrial heartland. They fly deep into Austria and Poland, even escorting British Mosquitoes and American photo-recon planes to targets once unreachable. Everywhere they go, the same story repeats: the Merlin Mustang owns the sky. For the bomber crews, the difference is life itself. "You'd look out the window," recalled one B-17 gunner later, "and see a silver Mustang slide up beside you. The pilot would waggle his wings and you'd just breathe again. You knew you weren't alone anymore." Back in England, ground crews race to keep up. Mechanics sleep in hangars, working through the night, repairing bullet holes, swapping out spark plugs, hammering dents from aluminum panels. The planes come back streaked with oil, their guns blackened, their pilots exhausted. Yet the rhythm of war continues, sortie after sortie, mission after mission. And in California, far from the thunder of guns, Edgar Schmued reads every field report, his pencil tracing the curves of the Mustang's silhouette on a pad of paper. The numbers, range, kills, fuel consumption, maintenance hours, tell a story more eloquent than any newspaper headline. His crazy idea, once dismissed as reckless engineering, has become the backbone of Allied air dominance. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe's decline is irreversible. The once feared formations of Bf-109s and Fw-190s are reduced to scattered skirmishes. German commanders plead for reinforcements that never arrive. On the ground, their airfields lie in ruins, strafed by the same Mustangs that once merely escorted bombers. For the men who fly them, the Mustang is no longer just a machine. It's a companion, swift, graceful, and unflinchingly loyal. Still, the war isn't over. The Reich remains defiant, its armies entrenched. The Mustangs will soon face a new kind of battle, against jets that defy propeller logic and against time itself as the world teeters toward the war's final reckoning. Autumn 1944. The sky over Germany is changing again. The Luftwaffe, bloodied and cornered, unveils a new weapon, one that seems torn from the future. The Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, cuts through the air faster than anything with a propeller can dream of. Twin Junkers Jumo engines trail thin blue smoke as the sleek gray aircraft dives past Allied formations at nearly 540 miles per hour, a speed that makes even the mighty Merlin Mustang look sluggish. The first time American pilots encounter the jet, disbelief ripples through the formations. "Christ, what was that?" crackles through the radio as a Me-262 blurs past a flight of Mustangs escorting bombers near Frankfurt. Its pass is so fast the American gunners can't even track it. Within seconds, two B-17s are burning, their wings sheared by cannon fire. Before anyone can react, the jet disappears into the clouds. For the first time since the Merlin's debut, the Mustangs have met a predator faster than themselves. But Edgar Schmued's creation has one advantage the Me-262 does not: endurance, maneuverability, and numbers. The jet is fast, yes, but fragile, temperamental, and desperately short on fuel. Each German base that houses them is already half ruined from Allied bombing. Mechanics cannibalize parts from wrecks to keep a handful flying. And every time one takes off, the Mustangs are waiting. U.S. intelligence quickly learns that the Me-262s are most vulnerable during takeoff and landing, when their engines spool up slowly and their speed advantage disappears. Orders go out to every fighter group in Europe: target airfields known to house jet aircraft. Attack during approach and climb out. Captain Robert Jenkins is among those assigned to the new Jet Watch patrols. At dawn, his squadron circles near an airfield outside Munich, a suspected 262 base. The morning air is glass smooth, the horizon tinted red. They wait. Then, faint in the distance, a black dot lifts from the runway, growing larger by the second. "Bandit taking off, low and slow," Jenkins calls. He dives, throttle full forward, the Merlin screaming. The Mustang drops like a hawk, closing in as the Me-262's engines struggle to gain thrust. The German pilot spots the attack too late. Tracers flash and the jet erupts into orange flame, skidding off the runway in a trail of smoke. The radio fills with cheers. Splash the jet. Splash the jet. It becomes a familiar pattern. The Luftwaffe's miracle weapon, starved of fuel and time, never achieves the numbers or momentum it needs. For every Me-262 that climbs, 3 or 4 Mustangs prowl above, ready to pounce. Pilots joke grimly that the Mustang's new nickname is the Jet Hunter. In England, at Mustang bases from Leiston to Bodney, engineers and pilots discuss the jet threat over cups of lukewarm coffee. "It's fast," says one mechanic, "but it can't turn worth a damn." Another adds, "Speed doesn't mean much when you've got to land eventually." They're right. The P-51s begin targeting runways directly, strafing them with .50 caliber fire until they're cratered and unusable. Still, the encounters are deadly. When the 262s do catch bombers or isolated fighters in the open, their 30mm cannons tear through aluminum like tissue. Every Mustang pilot knows that if a jet catches him in a head-on pass, there's no escape. The trick, as always, is to anticipate. To be above, unseen, and strike before the jet can bring its speed to bear. Through that grim winter, the duels between Mustangs and Messerschmitts become a symbol of the old world clashing with the new, piston versus jet, craftsmanship versus innovation born in desperation. And at the center of it all, Edgar Schmued watches from afar, fascinated and a little defiant. In his office at North American Aviation, he reads the intelligence briefings with a quiet, knowing smile. "They had to invent an entirely new kind of engine just to catch us," he says to a colleague. "That's how you know we built something right. The war is reaching its endgame." Allied bombers now roamed the German heartland unopposed for hours. Fuel depots burn. Railways vanish under craters. The Luftwaffe, once the master of Europe's skies, has been broken, its pilots scattered and exhausted. And above the ruins the Mustangs still fly, steady, tireless, unstoppable. They are no longer just escorts, they are executioners of an air force that once terrified the world. By the spring of 1945, the sky belongs to them. The last Luftwaffe sortie of the war, a desperate defense of Berlin, is met by waves of P-51s. The Germans climb once more into the sun, outnumbered 5-1. The Mustangs meet them in silence, the final ballet of the air war unfolding over a dying empire. When the smoke clears, the horizon is empty. Only contrails remain, fading slowly over the ruins below. May 1945. The guns are silent. Germany is in ruins, its cities reduced to ash and steel. Across the shattered airfields of the Reich, the bones of the Luftwaffe lie scattered, burned fuselages, melted wings, twisted propellers half buried in mud. And among them, on airstrips from England to France to Italy, the P-51 Mustangs sit quietly in neat rows, their engines ticking softly as they cool. The war in Europe is over. Captain Robert "Bob" Jenkins, now a veteran with dozens of missions behind him, steps down from his plane, Sweet Eloise, the name painted in blue cursive below the cockpit. The Merlin's metal hum fades as the crew chief unbuckles the engine cowling for inspection. Jenkins removes his flight gloves, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from the realization that for the first time in years, there's nowhere left to fly in anger. He looks across the field. Dozens of Mustangs glint in the morning sun. Each one carries a story, bullet holes patched, victory marks stenciled beneath the cockpit, exhaust stains trailing down silver fuselages. They have flown across continents, fought above clouds, and outlasted the men who built their enemies. The squadron briefing room, once filled with the rustle of flight plans and the hum of nervous laughter, is now quiet. A chalkboard still lists today's mission, Berlin Area Sweep, but it's been crossed out, replaced with 2 words in white chalk: stand down. For Jenkins and the others, it's a strange kind of peace. The adrenaline that has sustained them for years fades, leaving behind exhaustion and reflection. Many will return home to farms, factories, and families that can barely comprehend what they've lived through. Others will stay in Europe, helping with the long, painful work of rebuilding. But the Mustang story is far from over. As the U.S. military turns its eyes toward the Pacific, the P-51 is already being prepared for its next chapter, long-range missions over Japan. The newly developed P-51D, with its iconic bubble canopy and refined Merlin engine, becomes the ultimate expression of Schmued's design philosophy. Sleek, powerful, and forgiving, it's everything a fighter pilot could ask for. In early 1945, the Mustangs of the Pacific Theater take off from the island of Iwo Jima on missions that will test the limits of endurance, escorting B-29 superfortresses more than 1,500 miles to Tokyo and back. Over the endless blue of the Pacific, the Merlin engines hum steadily, the same familiar rhythm that once echoed over Europe. Those missions are grueling, 8 hours of flight, through storms and flak and fighter attacks. But once again the Mustang proves its worth. It brings the bombers home. It outflies its opponents. It endures. When Japan finally surrenders in August 1945, the Mustang stands as one of the few machines to have fought on both sides of the world, from the white cliffs of Dover to the volcano-shadowed runways of the Pacific Islands. In California, Edgar Schmued walks through the now quiet halls of North American Aviation. The war has ended, but his creation lives on. Rows of P-51s ready for peacetime service, their polished wings catching the afternoon light. He pauses beside one of them, running his hand along the smooth curve of its fuselage. He remembers the early days, the arguments, the prototypes, the sleepless nights when he fought to convince executives and generals that the Merlin engine was the key. He remembers the word they used: crazy. And now, the same airplane that once risked his career has helped win a global war. It wasn't just about speed, he tells a young engineer who asks how he knew it would work. It was about balance, power and grace, range and precision. The airplane was already right. It just needed the right heart. In the post-war years, the P-51 will serve in air forces around the world. It will fly in Korea, in Israel, in South America, a veteran of a war that taught the world the cost of invention. But for Schmued, and for the men who flew them, the Mustang will always belong to that moment in time when the world teetered on the edge of darkness, and the roar of the Merlin engine became a sound of hope. Decades later at airshows and museums, that sound still echoes. The deep, throaty growl of the Merlin rising into the clear sky. Crowds look up. Veterans close their eyes and remember. For a second, they are back in that cockpit 27,000 feet above Germany, with the horizon curving blue and endless before them. For them, and for history, the P-51 Mustang remains more than metal. It is a testament to imagination, persistence, and the courage to challenge the impossible. And for Edgar Schmued, whose crazy idea changed the fate of a war, it is proof that sometimes, genius begins with defiance. May 1945. The guns are silent. Germany is in ruins, its cities reduced to ash and steel. Across the shattered airfields of the Reich, the bones of the Luftwaffe lie scattered, burned fuselages, melted wings, twisted propellers half buried in mud. And among them, on airstrips from England to France to Italy, the P-51 Mustangs sit quietly in neat rows, their engines ticking softly as they cool. The war in Europe is over. Captain Robert "Bob" Jenkins, now a veteran with dozens of missions behind him, steps down from his plane, Sweet Eloise, the name painted in blue cursive below the cockpit. The Merlin's metal hum fades as the crew chief unbuckles the engine cowling for inspection. Jenkins removes his flight gloves, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from the realization that for the first time in years, there's nowhere left to fly in anger. He looks across the field. Dozens of Mustangs glint in the morning sun. Each one carries a story, bullet holes patched, victory marks stenciled beneath the cockpit, exhaust stains trailing down silver fuselages. They have flown across continents, fought above clouds, and outlasted the men who built their enemies. The squadron briefing room, once filled with the rustle of flight plans and the hum of nervous laughter, is now quiet. A chalkboard still lists today's mission, Berlin Area Sweep, but it's been crossed out, replaced with 2 words in white chalk: stand down. For Jenkins and the others, it's a strange kind of peace. The adrenaline that has sustained them for years fades, leaving behind exhaustion and reflection. Many will return home to farms, factories, and families that can barely comprehend what they've lived through. Others will stay in Europe, helping with the long, painful work of rebuilding. But the Mustang story is far from over. As the U.S. military turns its eyes toward the Pacific, the P-51 is already being prepared for its next chapter, long-range missions over Japan. The newly developed P-51D, with its iconic bubble canopy and refined Merlin engine, becomes the ultimate expression of Schmued's design philosophy. Sleek, powerful, and forgiving, it's everything a fighter pilot could ask for. In early 1945, the Mustangs of the Pacific Theater take off from the island of Iwo Jima on missions that will test the limits of endurance, escorting B-29 superfortresses more than 1,500 miles to Tokyo and back. Over the endless blue of the Pacific, the Merlin engines hum steadily, the same familiar rhythm that once echoed over Europe. Those missions are grueling, 8 hours of flight, through storms and flak and fighter attacks. But once again the Mustang proves its worth. It brings the bombers home. It outflies its opponents. It endures. When Japan finally surrenders in August 1945, the Mustang stands as one of the few machines to have fought on both sides of the world, from the white cliffs of Dover to the volcano-shadowed runways of the Pacific Islands. In California, Edgar Schmued walks through the now quiet halls of North American Aviation. The war has ended, but his creation lives on. Rows of P-51s ready for peacetime service, their polished wings catching the afternoon light. He pauses beside one of them, running his hand along the smooth curve of its fuselage. He remembers the early days, the arguments, the prototypes, the sleepless nights when he fought to convince executives and generals that the Merlin engine was the key. He remembers the word they used: crazy. And now, the same airplane that once risked his career has helped win a global war. It wasn't just about speed, he tells a young engineer who asks how he knew it would work. It was about balance, power and grace, range and precision. The airplane was already right. It just needed the right heart. In the post-war years, the P-51 will serve in air forces around the world. It will fly in Korea, in Israel, in South America, a veteran of a war that taught the world the cost of invention. But for Schmued, and for the men who flew them, the Mustang will always belong to that moment in time when the world teetered on the edge of darkness, and the roar of the Merlin engine became a sound of hope. Decades later at airshows and museums, that sound still echoes. The deep, throaty growl of the Merlin rising into the clear sky. Crowds look up. Veterans close their eyes and remember. For a second, they are back in that cockpit 27,000 feet above Germany, with the horizon curving blue and endless before them. For them, and for history, the P-51 Mustang remains more than metal. It is a testament to imagination, persistence, and the courage to challenge the impossible. And for Edgar Schmued, whose crazy idea changed the fate of a war, it is proof that sometimes, genius begins with defiance.